Hello, welcome back, Family Bonds parents. This is now our third video that we're going to do a continuation of the first part of the behavioral health principles video, where we described what is a behavior, what comes before behavior is an antecedent or a trigger, and then what happens after a behavior is a consequence. And the goal for today is to kind of put it together. Okay. Um, Usually, when I do these trainings, I have much more time to elaborate and expand. So, if at any point in time, again, if you have questions for me, very specific scenarios, I'm going to try and touch base a little bit on some of the more common things that I see. But don't hesitate to email me, christiano@elrio.org. You can also filter your questions through the Family Bonds Health Builders team, Kyla and or Susie. They will know how to get a hold of me. So I'm going to get it rolling and start going through this presentation. Um, Again, the information that I'm sharing are packets that you should have access to. Okay. So right now, what we want to do is to kind of pull it all together, right? What is an antecedent? What is a behavior? What is a consequence and a possible function? So I'm just going to do this first example. Michael is watching cartoons with his brother in the family room when his brother suddenly decides to change the channel. Michael hits his brother, and Michael's mother scolds him and sends him to his room. Okay. So, right here, right, the behavior is that I always like to start with the behavior and then go from there. So, that's kind of like my way of doing it. The first thing I do is identify what the behavior is. In this situation, Michael hits his brother. Okay. So, that's the behavior. What happened right before he hit his brother is that his brother decided to change the channel. So the consequence in this situation is that Michael's mother scolds him and sends him to his room. Okay, so that's what happened right after the behavior is that he was reprimanded for this. The possible function of this, right? Obviously he wants to he wants to watch what he was watching, right? And so the possible function for this could be a tangible access, meaning he hit his brother, right, to be able to get him to change the channel back. And or this could also be some sort of sensory function, it's like that feeling of being really upset and there could be an explosion, quick frustration and anger. So there could be like a sensory function to this. So what's going to be really important is a behavior can have multiple functions, but it will likely have a primary function. Okay. So when we're looking at, well, how do we modify the behavior, right? How do we modify the behavior? Or how do we prevent it from happening? So the very first thing is you have to look at the antecedent, right? And knowing what a trigger is and already preparing on how the response will be depending on what the trigger is. So there's certain preventative strategies that you can utilize to either ensure that the behavior does not occur, right? Or you can minimize the effects of a behavior just by being preventative, okay? So we will look into that. We will look into preventative strategies when it comes to a trigger. I will give you a very simple one. Um, Someone who is hungry and they get hangry and they get, angry and they could have outbursts, because they're hungry. A very simple technique that I, tell people. I used to work in residential treatment, and this was something that staff used to power struggle with the kids a lot, is just always have a bowl of fruit available to them that they can eat at any time. You know, Fruit, yes, it has sugar, but it also has fiber. And so we will always allow them to have as much fruit as they want. You're going to eliminate the behavior, because you're not power struggling with them. So we saw a lot of incidents of aggression go down just by allowing them to eat, right? So that's just a very simple example. So then once we go through preventative strategies, then we're going to look at consequence strategies. And in this situation, we're really going to focus on reinforcement. Reinforcement, essentially what that means, right? Because you can have positive and negative reinforcement. A reinforcement means that you are ensuring that the behavior increases. So reinforcement means that you will increase the behavior. Okay. So what I mean by positive reinforcement is um your like the praise. You're going to want to use positive reinforcement, right? For behaviors that are desired, right? So catch them being good. Now, there are other types of reinforcement. I'm getting stuck in my behavior analyst brain and I don't want to confuse you. So negative reinforcement means something different um, in the behavior analyst world. So I don't want to get really confused about that. So just for the sake of the video, I'm not going to kind of describe the difference between what negative reinforcement means in the behavior analyst world, but kind of like what most people understand as negative reinforcement is that if your child is needing attention and you're scolding them, right? And you're giving them attention through your scolding, some people might call that negative reinforcement, meaning that you're reinforcing the attention, but through a negative lens, or maybe not so much of a proper strategy, I guess you could say. So maybe towards the end, I'll give you a clue of what negative reinforcement means in the behavior analyst world. Okay. So this is where we're at. So we're going to start off with preventative strategies. Okay. So these are the most common preventative strategies that we use for a lot of different situations. You can avoid specific situations and or people, especially if they're triggered by these individuals. Now, in certain places, depending on what the behavior is, right, there might be a teaching component that goes along with this. But if you're in a situation where you really, really just want to ensure that the behavior does not occur, right, you can mitigate this. I have 4 kids, okay? I don't always have the energy to teach them to get along, to not say things to each other, you know. So I'm very intentional in certain situations if we're doing car rides on where they're sitting, right? And that is to prevent arguing. That's to prevent bantering or whatever they're doing, right? So I'm going to be intentional, and me and my husband, on where we give them assigned seats, right? Essentially. So that could be a preventative strategy. Now, that's not to say that I always want people to avoid uncomfortable situations, especially as a therapist, but it really depends on the behavior you're wanting to prevent. Okay. Control the environment. Really look at your environment and, what parts of the environment could be tricky. So this is kind of like really tailored to kids with autism. So you're going to see, putting locks on cabinets and on doors, because there's an impulse behavior kind of thing. But you're going to want to be very sure, right? If you have someone who's running away, who's sneaking away, and that kind of stuff, you will want to know how to control the environment. I would say that electronic time, and I will be doing a video on digital safety, would fall under control environment. Do things in small doses or steps. This is huge, huge, right? So kids get triggered when they're told to do something, right? Do your chores, clean your room. And they get pretty overwhelmed with that. And they might get an outburst and they will make this big mayhem to be able to avoid or escape the task, right? So when you present things in small steps, okay, this is what we call make a high probability request before you make a lower probability request. And what I mean by that is when you make a request someone, there's a higher probability that they'll do it, right? Versus a low probability request of like do your homework or clean your room, right? Or do a chore. So a higher probability request might be like, hey, let's go to your room. And, the first thing I'm going to just ask you to do is like, um, just pick up your shoes and put them away, right? So they're not thinking about just cleaning the whole room and that you're there for support. And then when they do it, fantastic, awesome. All right. So now the next step is this, okay? And then as they start doing small steps and you're reinforcing them, fantastic, great job. This works for teenagers too, right? Is saying like, all right, I'm here to support you. We're going to get this done. I know that it's hard, right? Then once they feel comfortable, they're like, oh, I feel like I can do this now, right? Then you can kind of like slowly start fading away and letting them do their task, right? Um, Change the order of events. This is something that we call a PREMAC principle. It's a very effective tool. It's a simple tool. It's also called the grandma's rule. When you, then you. Okay. When you finish your homework, then you can play video games. Don't allow them to play video games before they do an undesired task first. It's a very simple rule, very effective. It's the same concept with, first eat your vegetables, then you're going to eat dessert. And so this is a very important rule to learn is a lot of times parents are automatically giving their kids what they want before they do the things that they're expected to do. We want our kids to be independent and they're gonna, come home and clean their room and, do some chores and then they'll sit and do their homework and then they'll sit to do TV. Nuh-uh. If their dopamine and reinforcement is already available to them without any expectations, that's what they're going to do, right? So change the order of the events, respond to early signs of a problem. You can catch it, you can see it, you can be mindful, right? Like and say like, okay, I see you're triggered or I see this is happening, and then you can act accordingly. Change how you ask or respond. This is a very, very big one. Have you ever been in a situation where you're thinking about a conversation that you might have with someone and you kind of already know how they're going to respond, right? That's a learned behavior. And so we try and prepare ourselves with how we would respond or what we would do if they respond in a certain way, those kinds of things. So by changing the way that you ask, right, or how you respond to something, you're going to see some changes, right? So really, really take the opportunity to think about how you do those things. Address setting events. This is not something that I talked about in the previous one, but a setting event is something that makes the antecedent stronger. So an example of this is if you're working with someone with trauma, that is going to be an underlying setting event. It's what we call a long-term trigger that's with us for a while, right? And if you ask someone to do something that's unwanted or they feel out of control, you might see a very big reaction that you think like, whoa, I was really, that was kind of out of the blue or something like that. So a setting event could make the antecedent stronger. So addressing a setting event is like, I understand that this child has trauma, or I understand that they have some sort of disability, and they might not comprehend certain things. I understand that they had a really, really bad morning, or they're sick, and so in the afternoon, when you ask them to do something, they might respond. Okay, so you can address those long-term triggers. And then, of course, use visual and auditory cues. This really helps with our ADHDers or neurodivergent, kids, in showing the expectations. This is another way we also say like a task analysis for a particular task, or a list and that kind of stuff. All right. So these are the preventative strategies. You can go in and, continue to work through the activity sheets. I will not go, through them. Oh, here's an example of the Premack principle. First work, then play, right? That's one of the 7 habits of Stephen Covey as well. So then we'll finish off with reinforcement. So reinforcement in this situation, right, is, I'm going to focus on not modifying an undesired behavior because I can have a whole lesson on that. What I want you guys to focus on is reinforcing a desired behavior. So more often than not, parents are so focused on what's going wrong, and a lot of the energy is going into what's going wrong, right? And then when things are going really well, we don't really pay that much attention to it because we're like, oh, thank God, we can rest, they're doing what they're supposed to. And I understand that there's parents of varying degrees of, ideologies and things like that. My husband, for example, I'm a behavior analyst, I'm a therapist, right? His viewpoint is, why do I have to reinforce something that's already expected, right? So he has a hard time, just you're supposed to do it because it's the right thing to do. Why do I have to reinforce you to do that? So he and I have come up with a compromise, right? And I say, look at it as, what behavior do you want to acknowledge, right? And you want it to keep up. Because the example that I give is, if I'm at a job and they are not acknowledging the hard work that I'm doing, I'm going to lose my motivation for that job. If they're constantly telling what I'm doing wrong, I'm not going to have motivation to do what's right, right? Because there's no point. They're not going to notice when I'm doing something right. They're only going to notice when I'm doing something wrong. So as an employee, guess what? Bye, I'm out of here, right? It's a very similar concept in human life and behavior, right? Kids want to know what they're doing right. And when they feel that you acknowledge them for that, guess what? The motivations go up and they try and continue to do that. That's not to say that they won't have those undesired behaviors, but if you reinforce a desired behavior more often, you will see it more, right? So, the same things goes in partnerships, right? In partnerships where, a spouse might want to be acknowledged, right? For their efforts in the relationship. If it goes unnoticed, they're going to start losing motivation within the relationship. So it's a very similar thing, okay? So try and positively reinforce desired behaviors you want to see. So here are the types of reinforcers. It really depends on each person. If we're working with teenagers, they really enjoy, everyone's different. Everyone's different. So I'll just go over the different types. So some people really like primary reinforcers typically involve food or drink. We've had some discussions about this in family bonds, but those can be, really highly reinforcing things. The way that I present this is it's all in moderation, right? So if they're reinforced by a particular thing, and they're motivated and they work towards it, I would reinforce them with a desired food or drink item, if it falls within, our family norms and all that kind of stuff. So be really mindful about this. We don't just always want to give them whatever they want. Certain things have to be in moderation, especially when it comes to junk food. You have social reinforcers, high fives, hugs, praise, social attention. Tangible reinforces, could be a favorite item. Video game time would fall under this, electronic time. Activities and privileges. This is huge for our teenagers, being able to go out. I don't, yes, we want our kids to go out and have fun and be with their friends, and sometimes they don't have to do anything to earn that. And I understand that, but there will be certain situations where they have to earn those privileges of going out and doing the types of activities, that they desire. And then there's token reinforcers. This is mostly used with like the younger kids. And token reinforcers really help a lot with tangible function behaviors, where they want certain things and that kind of stuff. And so those can look like behavior charts with stickers. Now, sticker charts, if you've done them, can be really effective if that's what the reinforcer is, but it can be very ineffective because younger kids cannot wait so long for their reinforcer. Okay. When they're really, really little, they need the reinforcer like immediately. Immediately. That's why stickers always really work. Like, oh, I got a sticker, right? Or I got a high five, or I got a like, ooh. As they get older, they can wait a little bit longer. So in schools, you'll see people pay with money and then they can exchange that for treats at the end of the day. Teenagers, they can wait a little bit longer. I would say, a few days, especially if they're wanting to do something big on the weekends. But those daily reinforcers can also be like electronic time, and they can also be motivated by money, if that's something that you're open to. I don't pay my kids to do chores, absolutely not. They're a part of the community, but I would typically pay someone to do my yard, right? It's hot out. I don't like doing it. If I don't like doing it, I'm not expecting the kids to do it, right? So if they want to make some money and do some yard work and I can pay them, that's fine. If they want to do a house project, and earn some money, they can do that as well. Okay. So what's really important when it comes to reinforcers is really deciding what motivates them. Okay. It's not based off of what you think should motivate them, because then that won't motivate them, right? So to be able to reinforce a behavior, right, and also discourage undesired behaviors, right? There's this whole idea of earning and taking away. You're going to see a lot of parents will give, 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 and not give a lot of consequences. And they have really poor behaviors because there's no reason for them to change their behaviors. They get whatever they want. This is what we call satiation. And then you have the opposite end where they're highly restricted. Really long-term punishments do not work. I'm telling you right now, they just don't work. So when I hear someone say, "Oh, I got my phone restricted for a month," guess what? Their behaviors stay the same. They have no motivation to change. So typically what I'll say is more often than not, take these day by day, right? You earn a privilege in a day, you can lose a privilege in a day, tomorrow's the next day, right? Now, there are certain situations where I might do a little bit of a longer term punishment, depending on what it is. If it becomes very highly unsafe and they're doing very unsafe things, and in those different situations, I may say, let's look at a few days or a week until we can come up with a plan on earning that back. Okay. Um, all right. So here are some more handouts for you guys to review. This is, to do a reinforcement survey with your kids, what will motivate them, and how you select reinforcers. Okay. All right. So this is just going to give you more information. Reinforcement two. These are really good skills, catching your child being good, play skills, strategies to encourage joint play. What do you do if your child misbehaves? How to set up playtime. I don't really go over this because it's kind of more for younger kids, but it could have really helpful information in there as well. Okay. So I'm going to end, I'm going to stop sharing my screen real quick. Okay. So I'll just end this video with kind of describing what a negative reinforcement is from a behavior analytic standpoint. So A negative reinforcement, right, is if I'm experiencing, is when you take away something. Okay. So if I'm really cold, right, ugh, I might put on a sweater to take away me feeling cold. So then I've learned, right, that by putting on my sweater, I'm warm. So that that idea of taking away cold by putting on a sweater would be a negative reinforcement. So I'm taking away the cold, that's negative, but I'm reinforcing it, meaning there's a higher chance that I will continue to put on my sweater when it's cold. So that's what negative reinforcement is from a behavior analytic standpoint. The same goes like, oh, I have a headache. I want the headache to go away. Take away the headache. So I'm going to add, headache medicine, and then it goes away. So I'm reinforcing this by taking away the headache, right? So that's another example of a negative reinforcer. I mean, for anyone who really likes to learn about science. So, all right. Well, that's the end of the video, and I hope you all have a good day.